Has somebody spoiled something for you before? It's May the 4th, so May the 4th be with you. The spoiler there is that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's dad. It is Anakin, okay? So if you haven't seen that, if I spoiled that movie for you, well, it's been like 50 years, I think, something like that, since that movie came out. You should have seen it by now. Spoilers are somebody reveals the end of the story to you. So maybe it's a book that you're reading and you can't wait to get to the end, and somebody says, oh, well, Dumbledore dies at the end of that book. And then you're like, dude, what happened? What in the world? Maybe it's you're waiting to watch a movie and somebody tells you that Darth Vader is Luke's dad, right? For me, the worst time, and I think that there's some people that just get joy out of spoiling movies. Typically, these people are teenagers. So if you've ever worked or been around teenagers, they spoil movies for you all the time. I can remember working in student ministry, and I don't know if it was you that did it to me, but I think it was. No, your brother. I'm pretty sure it was Gabriel. But I was working in student ministry, and the Avengers series was coming out with a new movie called Infinity War. And so I was really, really into Marvel at this time. I had seen every movie that existed that Marvel had put out. I was really excited to see Infinity War. And Infinity War came out on a Thursday, and I couldn't go see it at its premiere. So what I did is from Thursday through until I was going to go see that movie, I cut off my social media. I didn't get online. I didn't want anybody to tell me what was going to happen in this movie. I cut off all contact with the outside world. If somebody were talking about Avengers, then I would leave the room, okay? I was this serious about wanting to see this movie. The problem was the premiere was on Thursday, and I still had to go work with a bunch of teenagers on Sunday. So I walk into the room, and somebody, I'm not saying it was you, but somebody said, all the people die at the end of Infinity War. And I was like, dude, are you serious? Are you serious? I wanted to know. I wanted to see that movie. I had told everybody not to talk to me about it. First thing out of his mouth, everybody dies at the end of Infinity War. You're the worst. I'm glad you're here today. But, well, yeah, it ruined it for me. So I'm sorry if I spoiled that for you. That movie came out in 2018, so you should have seen it by now. But spoilers are when somebody reveals the end of the story to you. Now, why am I telling you this? This is completely unrelated to Daniel chapter 2. What we're going to see is Daniel actually sees the end of the story in Daniel chapter 2. In chapter 1, we were looking at this idea of what does it look like to be believers in a world that doesn't look like you. Daniel in chapter 1 and Hananiah and Azariah and Mishael, his 4 friends, were taken out of Babylon with a bunch of other Jewish nobles, taken out of Israel and taken to Babylon, and they were forced to live with the people who worshiped different gods than they worshiped. They spoke a different language than they spoke. They ate different foods than they did, and they had different cultural practices. And so Daniel and his friends were taken out of a familiar context where their family was with them and where they worshiped one God and where they spoke a certain way and they acted a certain way and they kept certain laws, and they were put in a context where all of that was out the window. And so we started this collection of sermons about what does it look like for believers to live in exile. I said at the end of the sermon last week that I feel like we're in a time in Western culture where we are no longer living in a world that thinks like us, that acts like us, that talks like us. But I don't think the solution is to go back to the good old days. I don't think that's the solution. I think what the solution is to be believers in exile. And so we saw last week that believers in exile, they have conviction over compromise. They have confidence in God's care, and they have a commitment to excellence. And so we saw that in the lives of Daniel and his friends. Now today, I'm gonna lay it all out to you. We're going to cover the entirety of chapter 2 in Daniel. This is outside of what I would normally do because this is a large chunk of text. And so I'm going to teach it a little bit differently today. We're going to read a portion, and I'm going to explain a portion, and we're going to read a portion, I'm going to explain a portion. And I don't have all of the verses on here. I'm just going to read sections of it. And so what I would encourage you to do is go back and read Daniel chapter 2 when you get a chance at home. But what I'm going to do is show you the big picture of what's happening in Daniel chapter 2, okay? So we're going to start Daniel chapter 2 and starting in verse 1. And it says this. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams that troubled him, and sleep deserted him. And so the king gave orders to summon the magicians, mediums, sorcerers, Chaldeans, for them to tell the king his dreams. And when they came, they stood before the king, and he said to them, I have had a dream, and am anxious to understand it. And the Chaldeans spoke to the king. May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. And the king replied to the Chaldeans, my word is final. If you don't tell me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a garbage dump. Jump down to verse 10. The Chaldeans answered the king, no one on earth can make known what the king requests. Consequently, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked anything like this of any magician, medium, or Chaldean. What the king is asking is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals. So let's stop and recap. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream that's so anxiety-inducing that he can't go back to sleep. In fact, every time that he tries to go back to sleep, he just keeps waking up. Anybody have those issues where you wake up at like 3 a.m. and you stay awake until like 6:45 a.m. when your alarm goes off because you're worried about something? This is Nebuchadnezzar, right? And so he calls all of his wise guys in his kingdom together, and he says, all right, I need you guys to tell me my dream. And they're like, what? This is crazy. What you're asking of me is insane. He can't have said that. I'm gonna ask him a different way. You tell me the dream, king, and then I'll interpret it for you. And Nebuchadnezzar says, no, you don't get it. You tell me what I dreamed about, and then you interpret what I dreamed about. That is crazy. That's full tilt insane. Nebuchadnezzar has gone off his rocker, right? And so in this world of confusion, these wise guys don't know what to do. They're in their position because they provide the king advice. They're his advisors. They're in their position because they're good at what they do, and yet they're at a loss for even how to approach this. And so they actually ask him 2 different times, hey, tell us the dream, and we'll give you the interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar says, no, you tell me the dream, and you give me the interpretation. And I love what they say in verse 10. They say, no one on earth can make known what the king requests. Consequently, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked anyone this difficult question. What the king says is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals. Only the gods can give you this request, and the gods don't live with us. That's their thought. That's their statement there. Do you know this actually is a standard atheistic, agnostic trope that still exists today? I was listening to an interview with a Christian guy who was interviewing an atheist, or the atheist was interviewing the Christian guy, and he said this exact same thing. He said, science kind of shows us that there's got to be something out there that is some sort of creation agent. There's something out there, but we can't know what it is. And so this agent, whatever it is, got evolution started on a path and then took his hands off because the gods don't dwell with mortals. The world is in confusion. That this idea of the gods not dwelling with mortals is a thing that we still believe in some capacity. That we look at the fact that there cannot be a good God who's all-loving and all-powerful and all-knowing, because then all of these bad things in our world wouldn't exist. He doesn't reside with us. But what do believers and exiles do? When the world is in confusion, believers seek the truth. When the world is confused, believers seek the truth. Look at verse 14. Then Daniel responded with tact and discretion to Iraq, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to execute the wise men of Babylon. And he asked Iraq, the king's officer, "Why is this decree from the king so harsh?" And then Iraq explained the situation to Daniel. So Daniel went and asked the king to give him some time so that he could give the king the interpretation. Daniel's response is completely different. In fact, Daniel puts his life on the line to seek truth. What Daniel does is he goes with tact and discretion. Did you see that? That's a whole nother sermon I could get into. I think sometimes in the pursuit of truth, we completely abandon tact and discretion. I think we've got to do both. The Bible says to seek truth and love, but I'm not preaching about that today. I'm preaching about seeking truth. And what Daniel does is he goes and he finds out the situation. He wasn't with the other wise guys that Nebuchadnezzar had already laid this plan out. And so he goes and he says, "Why is the king's command so harsh?" And Iraq says, "This is what we're going to do. We're going to kill all these guys." And so Daniel takes it upon himself to go to the king. That is an executable offense. To go before the king and to ask the king to do something for you. Daniel takes it upon himself. He puts his life on the line for the pursuit of truth. And so what do believers do in a world that's confused? As believers in exile, when the world is confused, believers seek truth. Do you see what Daniel says to him? He says, "Give me some time and I'll bring the interpretation. I'll do it. I'll give you the interpretation." What the wise guys say is impossible, what the wise guys say is only possible through the gods who don't dwell with people, Daniel says, "Hey, I'll do it. You just got to give me time. The God that I believe in, the God that I exist, is powerful enough to do this. And he will give me an interpretation. Just give me some time." When the world is confused, believers seek truth. But Daniel doesn't just leave it there. Because when the world is isolated, believers seek community. Look at verse 17. Then Daniel went to his house and told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah about the matter, urging them to ask the God of heavens for mercy concerning this mystery, so Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the Babylonians' wise men. And the mystery was then revealed to Daniel in a vision at night, and Daniel praised the God of the heavens. What does Daniel do? He seeks community. He wraps himself around with his guys that believe the same thing that he believes, that talk the same way that he talks, that act the same way that he acts. We saw in chapter 1 that these 4 guys went through all of this ordeal themselves and never once batted an eye. We're going to see in chapter 3 that Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael are ready to face a fiery furnace because they believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so what Daniel does is, rather than isolate himself, even as a believer, he doesn't isolate himself. He goes into community. We live in a world that is isolated, that is increasingly isolated. There's a book that was written in the year 2000, and this book is called Bowling Alone. And in this book, what the author realized is that the longer that we progress in time, the more individualistic and isolated that America has become. And so in the 50s and 40s and 60s, when people would have bowling leagues and they would do these things, communal activities, what had happened in the year 2000 is that he was bowling alone. He was bowling by himself, that we weren't a communal people anymore. That was the year 2000, friends. Can I tell you what happened in 2020? I don't know if many of you were around, but in 2020, the world shut down. If I even back it up from there, in the year 2007, the iPhone came out, and that has spurred isolation. This is all before, do you know what happened in 2008? MySpace came out. Anybody remember MySpace? It was the first social media, right? And since then, Facebook was invented in 2009, and Instagram was invented, and Snapchat, and all of these social media ideas were invented. And what has happened is we are the most connected we've ever been in human history, and we are the most isolated. In 2020, when the world shut down, this isolation increased exponentially. That people who were church-going people or people who were group-going people were suddenly forced to be isolated. And for many of those people, that isolation has remained. But what we see is that when the world is isolated, that believers seek community. Did you know that Harvard, let me get you the exact study so you can look it up and tell me I'm not lying. Harvard Public Health produced a scientifically researched article last May about the benefits of weekly church attendance. The health benefits, okay? So it's this. The evidence suggests weekly religious service attendance is associated with lower mortality risk, lower depression, less suicide, better cardiovascular disease survival, better health behaviors, greater marital stability, happiness, and purpose in life. It's good for your health to go to church. This is what science is showing us now. So come back next week. I want you to live forever. So just come on back. Bring your friends, bring your neighbors, come to church. There is health benefits to being in community. We as a people have been made to be communal people. I said this in an article this week. If you read our newsletter articles, I said it this way. I said that while an individual may have a relationship with Jesus Christ and be justified by faith, the sanctification process takes place within the context of the community. That for us to continue to develop in our relationship with Jesus, we've got to surround ourselves with other believers. That we have got to be involved in a community of believers. This is point 2 of my 4 points of a disciple. That disciples grow relationally. How do we do that at First Baptist Bonham? We do it in our small groups on Sunday morning. If you want a Sunday school group, the best way to grow relationally with a community of people is to be involved in a Sunday school group. The best way to know whether or not you're here Sunday to Sunday is if you're in a Sunday school group. I cannot track you. I want you to be healthy. I want you to be cared for. But there's 150 of us now. And that number actually is only growing. So the more people we get, the less accountability I have for you. Not that I'm trying to keep you here, not that I'm checking a box. But for your spiritual, mental, emotional health, the best way for you to be known and loved and cared for is in a community group, a Sunday school group. So if you're not involved in a Sunday school group, I would encourage you to do that. But the long and short is that in an isolated world, believers seek community. It goes beyond that because Daniel actually reacts to the truth that he receives. When the world is broken, believers seek justice. Look at verse 24. Therefore Daniel went to Iraq, whom the king had assigned to destroying the wise men of Babylon. And he came to him and said, "Don't destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me before the king, and I will give him the interpretation." Then Iraq quickly brought Daniel before the king and said, "I have found a man among the Judean exiles who can let the king know the interpretation." And the king said in reply to Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me the dream and its interpretation. Daniel answers the king, "No wise man, medium, magician, or diviner is able to make known to the king the mystery that he asks about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries and has let King Nebuchadnezzar know what will happen in the last days." When the world is broken, seek justice. After coming together with his community of believers, after praying with these men, after seeking the face of God, that God gives Daniel the dream. The exact dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, God gives it to Daniel. And then Daniel, in chapter 1, we see that Daniel was gifted with interpretation of dreams. Daniel then interprets what this dream means. And so Daniel has the answer. Daniel then goes to Iraq, and what does he say? Don't kill these guys. Don't kill them. Daniel seeks justice for people that are his enemy. It would be beneficial for Daniel if Iraq would kill these guys. That would get them out of the king's ear. That would make place for him in career advancement. That would get rid of these enemies who have taken him out of his home. That would be God's justice towards his enemies. But what Daniel does is he sees brokenness in the world and he seeks justice. He doesn't seek revenge. He doesn't seek retribution. He seeks justice for these individuals. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is Micah chapter 6, verse 8. In Micah chapter 6, Micah is prophesying to Israel who had made a show of religiosity, that they found their hope in their works, that they found their hope in their ability to do things for God. And Micah is prophesying to these people, and he says these words, "Mankind, he has told each of you what is good, and what is it that the Lord requires of you? To act justly, to love faithfulness, and to walk humbly with your God." What God has called us to do is to act justly, to bring justice to the world. When we see brokenness in the world, the call on the believer is to seek justice. The difference between Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar is this. When Nebuchadnezzar looked upon people, he saw them as tools to be used. When Daniel saw people, he saw them as individuals to be loved and cared for. That's still the world that we live in. That people are seen as tools to be used, as people to be stepped on my way up the ladder, and my way in social advancement. If I can tear somebody down to benefit myself, then I'm going to do those things. And what Daniel does is he sees the brokenness of the world and he seeks justice instead. In a world that's broken, believers seek justice. And finally, when the world is hopeless, seek the kingdom. Look at verse 44. In the days of those kings, the God of heavens will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. And this kingdom will not be left to another people. It will crush all of these kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will endure itself forever. You saw a stone break off from the mountain without a hand touching it, and it crushed the iron and bronze and fired clay and silver and gold. The great God has told the king what will happen in the future. The dream is certain, and its interpretation reliable. And then King Nebuchadnezzar fell face down and worshipped Daniel and gave orders to present an offering and incense to him. The king said to Daniel, "Your God is indeed God of gods and Lord of lords, a revealer of mysteries, since you were able to reveal this mystery." You're going to have to go back and read this because there's some wildness to this dream. In fact, most interpreters, most modern historians cannot believe that Daniel wrote this letter in 650 BC. Because Daniel sees this dream from God, Remember that only the gods can solve this and they don't dwell with mortals, but Daniel believed that the God of heaven would give an interpretation. And so the God of heaven gave Daniel the vision of what was going to happen. And Daniel is so accurate that he nails it kingdom after kingdom after kingdom, 500 years into the future. Daniel predicts what happens kingdom after kingdom after kingdom, 500 years into the future. If you read the story, there's Nebuchadnezzar sees this giant statue. And on the head of the statue is a head of gold. And then the shoulders and torso of the statue are made of silver. The waist and the upper legs are made of bronze. And then from the knees down to the feet are made from iron and clay. And so what Daniel says is, great king, God has shown you what's going to happen in the end of days. And what's going to happen is the four metals are four kingdoms. And so he says, you, O king, you're the mighty gold kingdom. But there will be one that comes after you that's going to crush you. And then there's going to be one that comes after him who's going to crush them. And then there's going to be a fourth kingdom that's going to come and crush them. And then out of that, God is going to send a rock and destroy these kingdoms. Can I tell you just a little bit of military history? Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon ruled the world from 605 to 539 BC. In 539, they were overthrown by the Persian Empire, who ruled the world from 539 to 331. In 331, a man named Alexander the Great would lead Greece to overthrow Persia and gain imperial rule until 146 BC. And in 146 BC, one of the greatest empires to ever exist overthrew Greece to rule the known world until the 1400s. Rome was the feet of iron. And when Rome was ruling the world, do you know what happened? God sent a stone from heaven who came and walked among us. That God humbled himself and put on flesh and dwelt among us. And he established a kingdom that will not be shaken. He destroyed the wisdom of the wise through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Daniel was so accurate in the destruction of these kingdoms that historians can't believe he wrote it in 600. That's impossible. People don't know the future. But there is a God in heaven who revealed to him what was going to happen in the last days. And so, when the world is hopeless, we seek the kingdom. When God reveals the vision to Daniel, Daniel worships God and he says these words. May the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. He changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. It's God who is sovereign over the rulers of this earth. That it's God who raises up kings and kingdoms, and it's God who destroys kings and kingdoms. And so in our world, we can look around and feel hopeless. That we have wars and rumors of wars and earthquake and famine and all of these things happening, and yet we seek the kingdom. Because what Daniel sees is not a political king who's coming. What Daniel sees is God the Son coming to establish a kingdom that cannot be shaken. An eternal kingdom, and that happens. That's why all of history hinges on the birth of Jesus Christ. Because Jesus changed the course of history. When the world is hopeless, seek the kingdom. When the world is broken, seek justice. When the world is isolated, seek community. And when the world is confused, seek the truth.